Welcome everyone to another Ocean Ice webinar that is part of the series introducing the Ocean Ice project and its work packages. My name is Eva Hrobčáková and I work at the European Polar Board that is facilitating this webinar series. For those of you who don't know the European Polar Board, EPB is an independent organization focused on major strategic priorities in the Arctic and Antarctic. And EPB members include research institutes, logistics operators, funding agencies, scientific academies, and government ministries from across Europe. Now back to the webinar. So yesterday we also had one webinar. I'm not sure if all of you joined, but yesterday we focused on two work packages, work package 1 and 10. Dedicated to subpolar circulation, heat delivery, and water mass export. And today we will focus on work package 2, cryosphere-ocean interaction processes and feedbacks. I just would like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the EPB and Ocean Ice YouTube channels afterwards. But now I would like to give a word to Nico, who will tell you more. So please, Nico, go ahead. We cannot hear you yet.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm going to introduce this webinar. Thank you, Eva, for the first introduction. I'm co-leading this work package with Anna Wåhlin, and I will just introduce briefly the webinars. So first, a few words about Ocean Ice for those of you who don't know the project. So it's a project that overall aims to better understand the interactions between the Antarctic ice sheet and the Southern Ocean. You have a lot of observations in this project all around Antarctica. You've probably heard about it if you joined the webinar yesterday. And there is also a lot of modeling, for example, modeling of the dynamics of the entire ice sheet. But today we are going to speak more about the close interactions between the floating ice shelves and the Southern Ocean and between the floating icebergs and the Southern Ocean. This will include a few presentations about observations and a few presentations about iceberg modeling. And just now to give some context, so ice shelf ocean interaction started to be modeled in the 80s, and there has been a lot of progress since then. But now observational studies have highlighted the importance of feedbacks between basal melting and topography of the ice shelf base. For example, basal channels, basal terraces, crevasses, teardrops. And the problem is that a lot needs to be done before these processes can be well understood and therefore accurately represented in models. So you will have a few presentations about this aspect today. And then also a lot of progress has been made in parallel with iceberg, the modeling of iceberg melting in the Southern Ocean, I would say since the 2000s approximately. First, this has been the development of Lagrangian iceberg models and the development also of satellite observations of icebergs and methods to get useful products. Recent work points to the importance of icebergs' interactions with sea ice and bathymetry. This is very important for fast ice, polynyas, and the representation of water masses. And these processes are currently not or very crudely represented in ocean and climate models. And you will also hear a few presentations about this today. So this is the agenda. So basically we have two slots of 3 presentations, and there will be a 15-minute break in the middle. Please ask your questions in the chat during the presentations. And at the end, so either we will reply in the chat, or at the end there will be 40 minutes to reply to the questions. And we can also discuss. So you will be able to unmute if you want to discuss more in detail a few points. So I think that's it. And now the first speaker of this webinar is Xiaohan.
Okay, I will share my screen. And so, hello everyone. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share some of my research with you today. And my name is just a little bit brief introduction. My name is Xiaohan Yuan. I'm a PhD student at Tongji University in China, and my major is remote sensing. And I also was a visiting PhD student at the University of Gothenburg. So last year, I took part in an Antarctic expedition with Anna and our AUV group. We went to Amundsen Sea. So today, I will talk about what we learned after that expedition. So the title is Between a Rock and a Faster Place, the Collapse of Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf. And in this study, we combined remote sensor, oceanography, and glacier modeling, trying to answer the question like what mechanism triggers the ice shelf collapse. So let's start with some background. And we know that ice shelves are the floating extensions of the Antarctic ice sheet, covering about 3/4 of Antarctic coastline. And they can prevent buttressing affected to upstream ice, so it's very important for global sea level rise. But in recent years, with global warming, many ice shelves have been melting, thinning, and rapidly disintegrating, which can increase upstream mass loss and cause instability. And so the ice shelf loss mass mainly through two processes. One is the calving and the ice front, and another one is the basalt melting. In the left finger, the yellow areas show the parts of the ice shelf that can prevent the buttress effect. So the collapse of this yellow area can significantly increase mass loss of the ice sheet. As we can see, most parts of the ice shelf contribute to the battery. So monitor ice shelf collapse is very important. And the red finger shows the basalt melting rate and the ocean thermal force. There are very strong basalt melting rate in West Antarctic, which corresponds to a very warm ocean conditions. So in this study, we focus on the Thwaites Glacier in the Amundsen Sea, which is also the fastest flowing glacier in Antarctic. And so here is a map of our study areas. The floating ice shelf of Thwaites Glacier consists of two parts. One is the slower flowing eastern ice shelf, and another one is a fast flowing ice tongue. Over the past 20 years, the western ice tongue has experienced several large calving events, leading to a significant mass loss. But in contrast, the eastern ice shelf has been remain relatively stable, mainly because of the pinning point in the north, which can prevent backstress to the ice shelf and to keep it stable. So in January 2024, we visited this ice shelf, and the left finger shows the ice flow velocity of the Thwaites Glacier at that time, and we were surprised to find that the ice velocity of the eastern ice shelf had increased dramatically. So the flow velocity had previously been like 400 meters per year, but suddenly we found it can flow like over 1,000 meters per year. So and we also observed a lot of large rifts on the ice shelf, which indicates it may be like undergoing collapse. So we were very interested in this eastern ice shelf, and we used satellite remote sensor and photogrammetry to monitor its dynamic change, which includes the ice flow velocity, the surface deformation, and the fracturing and the calving events. And then we compare the ice shelf's behavior with the surrounding ocean conditions. And finally, we conducted diagnostic glacier modeling experiments to identify which mechanism is responsible for the ice shelf collapse. So next, let's look into the methods and results. First, for the ice flow velocity, we mostly use existing velocity products, but this dataset do not have data in recent years. So we also produced our own ice velocity map based on the image matching template matching method. And this page shows our velocity analysis. So the red top finger shows velocity change along the profile A prime. Before 2018, the ice velocity was quite stable. But from 2018 to 2019, the ice velocity near the grounding line started accelerating. And shortly after that, the ice flow near the pinning point in north also accelerated. So by 2024, the ice velocity of the entire ice shelf had more than doubled its velocity. But in contrast to the rapidly accelerated ice shelf, the velocity and the grounding line experienced a slightly change overall. It increased by about 15%. And then let's look at the ice flow direction change. In general, the ice shelf shows like a clockwise rotation towards to the northeast. So the most significant change here is near the pinning point. In 2019, we can see the ice flow can flow over the pinning point, but in 2024, the ice flow just diverged around it. So we could say that the pinning point it has changed from ice rump to ice rise, which indicates the Bacchus effect might also be changed, likely from a basal drawing to a lateral drawing. So then we, based on the ice flow velocity map, we also calculated the strain rates. Here, we can see two areas show significant changes. One is near the grounding line. In 2024, we observed a very high, here, very high positive longitudinal strain rates. Here, the positive longitudinal strain rates means indicates extension, which is typically associated with the formation and the widening of crevasses. And then near the ground pinning point, the longitudinal strain rates were negative in 2019, and this negative strain rates indicate compression, suggesting that the pinning point was resisting the upstream ice, so preventing a strong backstress effort to the ice shelf. But in 2024, we can see some parts of the region just show the longitudinal extension, indicating the Bacchus effect is weakened. And this area also developed into a very narrow shear zone because the very large velocity differences between the accelerated ice shelf and the almost stationary pinning point. So if we also look into the surface feature in those areas, near the grounding line, fractures began to appear in 2021, and by 2024, they had developed into a band of rifts. And near the pinning point, the ice shelf also shows significant deformation with lots of fractures. We can see it from satellite image. And since 2023, several calving events have occurred in the western part of the shear zone, which just weakened the connection between the ice shelf and the pinning point. So for better understanding for the status of this connection, we conducted a drone survey in this area during the expedition to produce a high-resolution topography model. And here we used two kinds of drill to collect imagery. One is a small DJI drone, and another one is a large fixed wing drill. And here are some photos during our field work. We also have a GNSS station to maintain the high accurate georeference for the imagery. And here it's our results. And so this, if we look into the surface elevation data, and so the red areas indicate the elevation close to local sea level is very low. It could suggesting the ice shelf has been disconnected from the pinning point. And yeah, so all of the results are kind of about horizontal change, but we also monitor the vertical change of the ice shelf. So we use some existing surface elevation data and SL2 satellite altimetry data to calculate the surface elevation change in a Lagrange framework. And then by assuming a hydrostatic equilibrium, so we can estimate the basal melting rates of the ice shelf. And here's the results. So most area of the ice shelf, the elevation change and the basal melting rates are quite slightly negative, but we can see very intense surface lowering rates and basal melting rates near the ground line, especially for this region M4. The average basal melting rates can reach approximately 50 meters per year. So and there are also some ocean mooring data available in this Pilot Bay. So we also analyzed the ocean temperature change in this area. The middle finger shows the temperature change and depths between 650 meters to 700 meters. So we can see that in recent years, the temperature has been increasing, but it just returned to a warm level similar to 2009. So this result is quite consistent with other studies saying that the ocean has been staying in very warm conditions since last century. And because these moorings are located near the Pie Island Glacier, so we compared them with the Sable Ice Shelf mooring and the Thwaites Eastern Ice Shelf. So the two data sets showed quite a similar trend, indicating that the Pie Island Bay pathway is a major contributor to the water entering the ice shelf cavity. So, based on all the observations, we found that near the ground line, there is fracture development, intense basal melting, and also the presence of warm ocean water. And near the pinning point, there are also fractures in the shear zone and batteries effect, which weakened the connection between the pinning point and the shear zone. And besides this ice shelf also still has a connection with the fast flowing western ice tongue. So it can also be influenced by the ice tongue. And so there are three mechanisms might contribute to the collapse, the rapid acceleration of the ice shelf. So we conducted diagnostic numeric glacial modeling experiments. To see which mechanism is the most important one. And so here our experiment design. For the experiment 1 and experiment 2, we simulated fracture during grounding line and with this pinning point. It's shared near the pinning point by softening the ice rheology. And then to simulate the decoupling from the Thwaites ice tongue, we also removed this area, And here is the results. So the experimental one, and here is the ice velocity change, and this is the effective strain change. So for the experimental one, we can see it can cause a widespread acceleration for the entire ice shelf and increase here. If you look into the effective strain rate, it can increase the effective strain in the downstream pain point, which aligns with our design of experiment 2. And both experiment 2 and 3, they can show more localized pattern of acceleration and deceleration. So if we compare the model results with our observation, we find that the general trend, the acceleration or deceleration, is quite consistent with observation. But the observed acceleration, like here between 2022 and 2024, it's much larger than any simulated ice velocity in any single experiment. So we combine the experiment 1 and 2, and then we can see the model shows a much larger acceleration, which matches very well with the observation. So based on all the observation and modeling, we can come to our final conclusion, which is since 2019, the Thwaites eastern ice shelf has more than doubled its ice velocity, and we observed a lot of large rifts near the grounding line where strong basin melting occurs, and also have warm water was present there for very, very long time. And the fracture near the grounding line, it can increase the downstream strain near the pinning point, so damages the structural integrity of the ice shelf, and then it's kind of like triggered positive feedback, like we have fracture and upstream and high resolution, higher velocity, and then we have fracture for the downstream, so it's like a feedback loop. So it can eventually lead to the collapse of the ice shelf. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think that we keep going with the presentations. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we can discuss them later or get the reply in the chat. And I think that the next speaker is Stina.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So yeah, you can see my slides now. Good. Let's change my pointer. Yeah, so I will present to you work I've been doing as part of the Ocean Ice project. Although the data is actually from the previous expedition in 2022 from the International Thwaites Glacier collaboration. But we derived a method for the expedition we did in 2024. Sorry, why isn't it working? Can you see my... Oops. Okay, sorry. So first, a little bit about Thwaites Ice Shelf. So it's an ice shelf on Antarctica close to the Thwaites Ice Shelf in Amundsen Sea. And the ice shelf front is around 100 to 400 meters thick. And just for a comparison, the Eiffel Tower is 300 meter high. So sometimes you think about like how hard can it be to actually do measurements under an ice shelf, but it's really hard because it's very, very thick. Okay, so the aim with this study was basically to derive maps of the ice shelf draft, that is how deep the ice is below the waterline, using long-range acoustics mounted on the AUV, the autonomous platform that we have. And we also wanted to increase resolution compared to what is usually what's the simplest way to doing it, and that is by treating each beam separately in the ADCP. Okay. So what is the purpose of determining the ice draft with a long-range acoustics? Because you can get much higher resolution if you go close to the ice shelf. And for us, the main purpose is risk minimization. And that is because when you go with an autonomous platform into an ice shelf cavity, it's much safer. We get much better navigation if we get either close to the seabed or close to the ice, and it's typically safer to go close to the seabed first. And creating those kind of maps could also help in post-processing of the navigation, because you get some navigational errors when you're inside an ice shelf. And it's also a way of measuring ice draft reliably, so that you could calibrate, for example, satellite measurements with them. And lastly, this is a way the ADCPs usually used to measure velocities and currents, and this is a way to get bonus information. And since missions under ice shelves are really hard to make, I think it's good to get as much information as we possibly can out of them. So what you see here is the scouting missions, or the seabed following missions that we did in 2022 under Datsun Ice Shelf in color. And then, sorry, do you see it? I lost I don't see what you see. And then we also have some high resolution ice draft measurements from multibeam, where the AUV was very close to the ice base. And then we use them to validate the data we get from those scouting missions. Okay, as I said before, ice shelf cavity missions are high risk. So you really want to reduce the risk as much as possible. And navigation is very important to reducing the risk, not only because we use good navigation in data analysis to know exactly where we have our measurements, but good navigation is also very important for actually being able for the AUV to find its way out of an ice shelf again. And as I said, the navigation is much improved if we can be within 100 meters from either the seabed or the ice base. And the reason that we want to go close to the seabed first is that typically close to the ice shelf front, the bathymetry is better known. So we can go there, scout the ice draft, and then we can plan future missions close to the ice. Okay, so this is the setup. So we had our AUV in the bathymetry following mission. And then we had an upward-looking ADCP with 4 beams. And the range of this ADCP is around 1 kilometer, so we could always see the ice space from it. And here's a photo from Xiaohan's nice drone photos of a recovery of the AUV from 2024. Just so you see, here's the icebreaker, so you see the size of it. Yes, and just as a reminder, when I talk about ice draft, I mean the thickness of the ice below the water surface compared to the total ice thickness. Okay, so what's the so if we detect the ice base in each beam separately instead of like the usual ADCP footprint, which is the combined beams, we get a much smaller footprint. In our setup, it's where the AUV was around 400 meters below the ice base. The difference in footprint is about, like, for a single beam, it's 30 meters, but for the combined beams, it's 300 meters or more. And we also get more data points because we have 4 beams instead of 1 combined beam. And detecting the ice base in this way has previously been done by Roseau et al. This paper, where they had a mooring. Yes, they had a mooring here with an upward-looking ADCP, so it didn't move. It couldn't move around, but due to currents, tidal currents, it would rotate. So therefore, the four beams would trace like a circle on the ice base. And they actually saw here that the shape of the ice base had a quite like a step, more or less, basically, with a 20-meter height difference in ice draft over 40 meters. Some details for our setup. So we use the ADCP echo intensity. That is kind of a measure of backscatter, although it isn't normalized as if you would actually look at backscatter. And we had quite a lot of acoustic interference from other instruments, so we had to remove those first. Unfortunately, we couldn't integrate the ADCP to the AUV so that we could do some. So this is what you see in this first figure here is the all those vertical lines are acoustic interference. But when you remove them, you can also see the ice base clearly as a high scatterer, right? So we could detect the ice base basically based on echo intensity. And then we use an interpolation, a quadratic interpolation, to get subcell resolution, because the resolution of the initial resolution of the ADCP is quite coarse. It's 32 meters. Yes, and the ADCP was in burst mode, so it sent out a ping like every 2 to 3 seconds. So that means, yeah, a few meters apart. Okay, so some results. So here are the 2 ice draft maps that we got from those scouting missions. And they are show them together with a SAR image. So in the SAR image, you can see crevasses here and here, and you also see the ice shelf edge. So the black here is open water, and the gray is the ice shelf. And you see that the data match really well. You can see all the ice, all the crevasses line up quite well, and the ice edge. So first inspection, it looks like it works really well. And then we also had this opportunity to compare with the multi-beam ice draft, which we see as a ground truth. It has very high accuracy. So in the first panel here is the just the ADCP derived ice draft, and in the second one is the multi-beam derived. And then you see them overlaid, and here's the difference. So you see in general we get small errors, less than 10 meters. The crevasses, we get high, like quite high errors just where the crevasses are, because they're slightly mismatched, and it's hard to know if that is AUV navigation in the multi-beam maps or in the ADCP maps, but it's also within 50 meters, so that's kind of the footprint anyway. And then if you just look at the distribution of the difference between the ADCP derived and the multi-beam derived, you see, so the cell size is 32 meters, but you see that the interpolation makes the error much smaller in general. So the interpolation works really well, and this method also works really well, even though we're at 700 meters under the ice shelf. And for comparison, I just wanted to show you the same data set, but without interpolation. And then you see how effective, even though it's a very, very basic 3-point interpolation, it really improves the data quality. Okay, so conclusion and what's new. So we have shown here that it's entirely possible to derive ice draft from a moving platform under the ice base with long-range acoustics, so that we can do much safer missions close to the seabed while still getting a good resolution ice draft maps. And we had the possibility to actually compare it with multi-beam maps. So we could actually see the errors here and how small they actually are. And this is also the first, I think, so the mooring that was done in presented in the Roseberg paper, it was a mid-range ADCP, so it was 100 meters below the ice base. and this one is a long range, so it's further down. And we also have 2 new datasets of ice draft under Dotson ice shelf, and they're just partly overlapping with the existing multi-beams one, but those new datasets cover a much bigger area. There's a preprint coming soon, so keep updated. And yes, thank you for listening. Here's a photo of the team from 2024. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Stina. Please remember that you can ask questions in the chat, and then we can discuss later. So the third presentation of this afternoon is from Yixi.
Can you see my screen clearly? Nice.
Yes,
If you couldn't, please shout at me. Right, so my name is Yixi, and I am a postdoc at the British Antarctic Survey. And today I'm going to show you some results that we found from the turbulence of observations beneath the Fimbul Ice Shelf. So I've only started this work about 6 months ago, so any suggestions or comments are highly welcome. Please email me if you have any of those. Right, I will start sharing. So, right, so our motivation. Xiaohan already mentioned super clearly about how important ice shelves are in the Antarctica, and because they are super important for the future sea level rise, and therefore also important for the human society. And why we chose Fimbul Ice Shelf is also because some very special things about this ice shelf. So the first part is about its location. It sits at the continental shelf break, which means that it's very sensitive to the recent change in the Antarctic slope front. So we know that from previous publications that we can have inflow from this place and this place. So it means that everything that happens to the changes in the wind and even the sea ice coverage in this region will affect the Antarctic slope front, and then in the end affect the water entering beneath the Fimbul Ice Shelf. And also in this place, thanks to the observation network that Norwegian researchers have built in this place, that we have a lot of historical data collected beneath Fimbul Ice Shelf, including data from a very thorough bathymetry survey, and also more than 15 years of mooring data in this place. So it means that those data can provide us a chance to do a very comprehensive investigation in this region. And from those observations in this place, they've also shown that the Fimbul Ice Shelf has been affected by very frequent warm water intrusion. They can double the melt rate in this region. So in 2023 and 2024 field season in the Fimbul Ice Shelf, we observed those lines beneath the about 1 meter beneath the Fimbul Ice Shelf. So this red one is the temperature beneath Fimbul Ice Shelf, and then this blue one is the flow speed beneath Fimbul Ice Shelf. So we can see that in this part, which is about August in 2024, we have a warm water intrusion in this place with the elevated temperature and flow speed. So I also want to mention another motivation that in our in this field season, we drilled a borehole at this location, which is the M2 location, that if you can see my cursor here. And thanks to our super hardworking field work team and also the logistic team, we also have the IceFin ROV in this place that detected a basal channel in this M2 location. So we put our mooring above this basal channel. So this then linked to my third point in the motivation bit, that the turbulence processes at ice ocean boundary layer, and especially beneath, especially above the basal channel, is very poorly understood. So this gives us another good reason to do our turbulence study in this place. And then is our turbulence instrument setup. So we have the ice base here at about 350 meters, and then also our turbulence instrument clusters about 1 meter beneath it. Of course, it's not true to the real life scale, otherwise life would be so much easier. And so we have our instruments here that can measure the temperature and also the flow speed. And we allow our turbulence instrument cluster to run in an on and off setting. So it's the same as what Stina just mentioned, the burst setting, that it will be turned on for 15 minutes in every 2 hours to save the energy when it's off, and also to take the burst measurement when it's on. So one 15-minute measurement will make one burst. So one burst then could be understood as one set of data of the velocity and also the temperature measurements. And this is the turbulence velocity frequency spectrum that we get from our burst data. It's a very complicated figure, and I apologize to anyone who hasn't done much work in turbulence data. I promise that I share the confusion that you have now when I just started. So for each burst, we calculated the streamwise velocity. And then from that streamwise velocity, we calculated the burst average flow speed, and then the deviatory time series of the velocity. So from the deviatory time series of the velocity, for each burst, we can get one line, which is one spectrum of the one frequency spectrum. Then we can get everything shown in this spectra plot. So one line for one burst. And I color them by the, I color all the lines by the average velocity that we have for each burst. So you can see that the higher the flow speed is, the higher the energy level is, which makes sense because the higher the average speed is, the higher, the stronger the turbulence will be. So then the stronger the turbulence energy will be. And to make this figure slightly easier to understand, we then bin them into 1 centimeter per second speed bin. So again, the blue color means high speed, and then the red color means 0 speed. And those figures now allow us to do some analysis in a clear way. So you can see that those peaks that we have here, those are the noise flow that we can then cut off. So this noise is from the flow passing through our instrument and causing the wake. They can then be captured by our instrument. And we can also get the wave number spectrum here. And what's important here is that we can see this slope here fits our Kolmogorov minus 5.3 slope. And this is very important because this can then allow us to calculate the turbulent dissipation rate. To try to explain this, I've stolen Peter Davis' slide from his first presentation in 2020. And so we can see this blue line. So if we do the turbulence spectrum and analysis of all the signal in the ocean, we will then get an energy containing range, which is this bit, and then the inertial subrange, which is this bit, and then the dissipation range, which is this part. But what we need to use in our study is this part, the initial subrange. So I mentioned that we can get a turbulence dissipation rate. So how to get that is by this. So if I try to fit the figure that I've shown you just in the previous slide to this figure, and then we can see that those lines here, they match this slope, as I mentioned, the Kolmogorov slope. So these have proven that our observations have fit the theory almost perfectly. And with those lines, we can then try to solve this equation here. So with this EJJ, the energy level, and then the constant here, and with the K being the wave number, then we can get our dissipation rate. So which means that for all of our bursts, we can get the dissipation rate from them, which gives us one dissipation rate every 2 hours to get this beautiful time series that we have here. And this one is already very informative. So we try to do some analysis on this turbulent dissipation rate, and by comparing them with the TKE, which is the kinetic turbulent kinetic energy. So we can see that the higher the turbulent kinetic energy is, the higher the dissipation rate is, which is something that we're expecting, again, because like what I said, the stronger the flow is, the stronger the turbulence will be, and then so as the dissipation rate. Similarly, for the average speed, we have the similar correlation, but quite sadly, we do, because beneath Fimbul Ice Shelf, we don't really have a very strong stratification. So then when we are comparing the dissipation rate with the N, which is the stratification that we have, we couldn't really see a very clear stratification, which means that the stratification in this place is not strong enough to really cause much effect in our dissipation rate. And we can also see from the comparison between the dissipation rate that we get from the deviatory time series of the zonal velocity of the streamwise zonal velocity, and then another velocity that is perpendicular to it. So then we can see that the turbulence in this place is almost isotropic horizontally. And then from our dissipation rate, we can also do another comparison, which is with this figure that I've shown in the previous slide. And with the red-ish line for the temperature, and then the blue line for the velocity. So when we had this warm water intrusion in August, we also had a high dissipation rate. So this is super cool because it means that our turbulence was significantly higher during this time, which can then transport the warmer the warm water content heat maybe upwards to melt the ice shelf. So how to prove that? Again, thanks to our super hardworking field team, that we also deployed an upward-looking sonar at the same location. So the upward-looking sonar can measure the distance from the instrument to the ice base. So which is shown in this figure with the y-axis, the distance to the ice. So we can see that at the beginning of our campaign, the distance from the instrument to the ice base was about 0.9 meter. And then towards the end of it, it was about 1.8 meter. So which means that the ice shelf was melting away at about 1 meter per year rate in this location. And then from this blue line, which is the despiked measurements from our upward-looking sonar, we can then get a time derivative to get the melt rate, and then we converted the melt rate that we get to a more universal scale, which is meter per year. So then we can see that when we had the warm water intrusion event, which is in this region, we had the melt rate reached almost 3 meters per year, while at other time we have those we have this blue line fluctuating near the zero line, which means that the melt rate was quite small. We do acknowledge that this line is still very noisy, but from this upper panel, we can see that the distance to the ice base changed dramatically in this bit, proven that when we had this warm water intrusion, this signal, this high melt rate signal was real. It was an artifact. And then from this one, we can then try to compare our melt rate with what we get from the figure that I shown you before with the temperature here. But then now I'm introducing a new line, which is this blue one, as the absolute salinity. So we can see that when the ice shelf was melting rapidly, we also had the salinity dropping in this place, which again prove that the glacial ice was melting that time, releasing the fresh water into the ocean that was then captured by our instrument. And since now we have the ground truth measured melt rate, we came back to our turbulence data again. So from our turbulent data, we can get this W prime, which is the deviatory time series of the vertical velocity, and then there's the T prime, which is the deviatory time series of the temperature. So those could be understood as the turbulence caused changes in the W, which is the vertical velocity, and then the T temperature. So the product of them can give us the turbulent heat flux. I apologize, I forgot the density and also the heat capacity in this equation. Yes, but we can still, from those, we can get the heat flux in the pink lines here. And we ran the 2-day low-pass filter to get this thicker line, which is the clean signal of our turbulent heat flux. And then from the equation below, which shown that we have the relationship between the ocean heat flux, which is what we got from here, and then also the glacial melt rate, as we can see this bit, and the conductive heat flux, which is tiny, so we are crossing it out in this place. So from the equation here and the pink line here, we can get the glacial melt rate from our turbulent heat flux, which is then shown in this pink line. So the pink one is the turbulent heat flux derived melt rate. And then this this green line is what I just shown you, the ISA, which is the upward looking sonar measured melt rate. So we can see that they agree pretty much well, and especially in where we had this warm water intrusion event. The lines are highly correlated, which gave us more confidence on our upward looking sonar and also our turbulence data. And so with our, now we know, with our turbulence data, now we know that in year day about 220, which is the August bit, we have the warm water intrusion, and then we get back to another data set that I'm showing here, which is the SAO9 temperature array across the ice ocean boundary. So this is a little bit complicated with the 0 y-axis here as the ice base. So we deployed a temperature array across the ice ocean boundary layer, and we can see that above this ice base we have data, the temperature data within the ice. So it would be within the Fimbul Ice Shelf, and then also beneath the ice, so in the ocean. So below this line would be within the ice, so this is this bit, and then for the lower panel, and then above the ice would be this bit. So that's the data within the glacier. So when the temperature was at about 0 degrees C, it means that time when we had the borehole, and the borehole was freezing up, and because the freezing point of the glacier was 0 degrees C, so we can see that when the borehole was freezing up, the temperature was decreasing slowly until we reach the equilibrium. And then for the ocean beneath the ice base, we can see those bits. And with the red means that the temperature was high, and then the blue bit means the temperature was low. And we can see those stripes, which means that the ocean was almost homogeneous in the vertical scale. And this sound night temperature array was measuring the ice and the ocean at a very high frequency, as 10 meter, as 10 as frequent as 1 measurement per 10 minutes. So we can see these very high frequency changes in the ocean, and so it records the vertical temperature straps in the ocean, indicating that the high turbulent heat flux that I just shown you is not just from the water beneath the ice, because if it is the case, we will see a much higher temperature, vertical temperature gradient in our figure, but that's not what we are seeing. So it means that the high turbulent heat flux that we are seeing from the figure was actually from a larger scale horizontal water transport that was captured in our sound night array. And a bit of extra is this one, which is the drag coefficient that we can also get from our turbulence measurement, which is presumably very important for model development in this place. And that will be everything that I want to show today. Thank you. And if you have any question, please send me emails. And I also want to give a special thanks to all the funding sources and again, super hardworking field team.
Thank you, Yixi. So I think that we are more or less on time. We have well, even 5 minutes ahead. So we now have a break. Please use this time to write questions in the chat if you have. Otherwise, we'll discuss after the 3 remaining presentations. So let's meet again at 20 past 3, so in 20 minutes. So there will be 3 more presentations. The first 2 will be on modeling icebergs, and then Anna will conclude this slot with a talk on melting inside ice shelf fracture. Please put your questions in the chat if you have any. And at the end, we'll have time to discuss in more details, and you can even be unmuted if you want to ask directly your questions. We are starting with Anna Olivé Abelló. Are you ready, Anna?
Yes, I'm ready. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Cool. Can you see it?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, hello to everyone. My name is Anna, and in this talk, I'm going to present the results that we have obtained for the last 2 years, revisiting the iceberg thickness distribution in the NEMO iceberg model. This work has been performed mainly in Grenoble with Pierre and Nicolas, but also collaborating quite close with Yavor and Paul from the British Antarctic Survey, also colleagues from Ocean Ice, and has been also performed with a collaboration of Simon Gascoigne and Clément Rousset from the University of Toulouse and Lausanne in Paris. Okay, perfect. Okay, so first I will give a little bit of background. Currently, the Lagrangian iceberg model implemented in NEMO does not consider the Antarctic ice shelf thicknesses from which the icebergs calve. Instead, the iceberg characteristics are prescribed a priori according to Table 1. As you can see here, the iceberg model only considers 10 different classes of iceberg according to their sizes. So for example, class 1 corresponds to the smallest icebergs and class 10 to the biggest one. And as you can see, from class 5 to class 10, the icebergs that we will be able to simulate will have a maximum thickness of 250 meters. This is clearly underestimating the iceberg thicknesses, given that we have
quite frequent observations of icebergs grounding on substantially deeper bathymetric ridges. But why is so important to represent accurately these iceberg thicknesses in our simulations? The answer is that icebergs can ground on relatively shallow bathymetric ridges, promoting the formation of fast ice, as you can see in the scheme, also promoting the formation of polynyas that corresponds to these holes on the sea ice where the dense water mass formation occurs. And finally, the freshwater release when these icebergs are grounded on shallow bathymetric ridges stratify the water column, reducing the deep convection. So finally, the main objective of our work has been to get a better representation of the iceberg thickness, this time taking into account the Antarctic ice shelf thicknesses from where they are calved, and identifying the potential grounding iceberg locations. So for that, to get a better representation of the iceberg thickness, we propose a new analytical formulation for the iceberg thickness distribution that will consist mainly in two functions. So first, we have a curve in common for all the Antarctic ice shelves, and will shape the thickness of the smallest icebergs. And this curve in common has been defined using the Astrom 2021 definition for tabular icebergs. And from this turning point that will depend on the mean Antarctic ice shelf thickness, we establish a flat distribution that this time will depend on each local ice shelf thickness. So I will not give a lot of details according to this, just believe me, it works. But once this iceberg thickness distribution has been defined, we ran mainly 3 experiments using a circumantarctic configuration with a 1/4 degree of resolution. Each of these experiments has been running for 40 years, and I'm going to explain a little bit in what consists each of them. First, we have the old experiment that mainly considers the classical thickness distribution, that is the one currently available in NEMO. Then we have the no grounding experiment. This experiment already considers the new thickness distribution that we have defined, and considers also implements the Antarctic ice shelf thicknesses obtained from bend machine version 3. Our reference experiment is the same as the no grounding experiment, but this time it considers a simple scheme for grounding. So every time that an iceberg is approaching land or is approaching shallow bathymetric ridge, this iceberg, the horizontal velocities will be set to 0 and will return to the previous cell. Let's start with the results of these 3 experiments. As you can see in this figure, we have been representing the iceberg maximum thickness distribution across the Southern Ocean. And mainly for the old experiment, no grounding experiment, and reference experiment. As you can see in the left panel, in the old experiment, no icebergs are thicker than 250 meters, as you remember in the table 1, as the old code has been defined like this. But now, with the new definition for the iceberg thickness distribution, in the no grounding experiment that corresponds to this middle panel, iceberg thicknesses range from a few meters up to 678 meters. So, as you can see, these thick icebergs, usually represented in green, will be mainly found over the Antarctic continental shelf, mainly carried out by the Antarctic coastal current counterclockwise, and most of them will surround the Antarctic continent, flowing north, and then leaving the domain through the iceberg alley. However, this iceberg maximum thickness distribution will change completely if we activate this simple grounding scheme. As you can see in panel C, icebergs will have the capability to ground. So, and I will zoom it if I can. Okay, perfect. So icebergs will mainly ground. Well, the thick icebergs will ground over the Antarctic continental shelf, especially in front of Filchner Ice Shelf and Thwaites Glacier. And icebergs, these thick icebergs will remain there until they melt enough to cross the shallow bathymetric ridges and continue flowing across the Southern Ocean with thinner thickness. Once these icebergs have the capacity to ground, we validate their persistence comparing the probability of iceberg occurrence in Amundsen Sea in our REF simulation that corresponds to this panel with observations obtained from Sentinel-1 satellite images published in the work of Mazur et al. In 2017. As you can see, the reference simulation fairly reproduce the shape of this iceberg occurrence distribution. And even though we cannot perfectly reproduce this highly persistence, because in the work published by Mazur et al., we have this highly persistence along the buried, and in our case, no. So we cannot perfectly reproduce that, because in our case, this highly persistence is mainly found near the coast. However, we are quite happy with it. And let's start with the freshwater results. So once one iceberg calves, it will melt progressively along the Southern Ocean. In terms of Antarctic sector, the Weddell Sea is the sector that receives more fresh water. But when we activate the grounding scheme, these melt rates decrease significantly, especially in the northern top of the Antarctic Peninsula. In contrast, the rest of Antarctic sectors will receive more fresh water, mainly over the Antarctic continental shelf, as you can see represented here in green colors. Additionally, we analyzed where the iceberg melting ends in terms of MBI basin source for the no grounding and the reference scenario. So in this panel, we represented the total melting. Here we have the 18 basins, and the left column corresponds to the no grounding experiment, while the right column corresponds to the reference experiment. In blue, we represented the total melting that ends on the open ocean, and in brown, we represented the fraction of total melting that ends on the continental shelf. Even though the Antarctic continental shelf represents a small fraction from the entire Southern Ocean, it receives more than half the freshwater contribution, being the Ross West and the Peak Thwaites, the MBI basins that are contributing the most to the continental shelf, and the Ronnie being the MBI basin that contributes more to the open ocean. However, when we activate the grounding scheme, these freshwater contributions to the Antarctic continental shelf increase. This additional release of fresh water on the continental shelf due to the melting of icebergs have a huge impact, especially on the ocean, especially in the bottom temperature and bottom salinity. This is because this additional fresh water increases the ocean stratification, reduces the deep convection, as I have said before, and this disconnects, separates the water column, keeping fresh, for example, in this case, and as you can see in this middle panel, the Ross Sea and the Weddell Sea. At the same time, this stratification strengthens the density gradient across the shelf break, which favors the intrusion of the relatively warm circumpolar deep water. So at the end, it also makes that, for example, in the Amundsen Sea and Amari Basin, bottom waters, well, the bottom, the seafloor warms up to 0.2 degrees. Finally, as I have said in the first slide, grounded icebergs favor the formation of the fast ice. So we wanted to validate our results, plotting the grounded iceberg frequency in front of the fast ice persistence. So our reference results have been represented in warm colors, and the fast ice persistence that has been obtained from the work published by Fraser et al. In 2021, that comes from satellite images for the period 2000 to 2018, has been here represented in blue. So we have both, and as you can see, for example, in East Antarctica, grounded icebergs form a downstream barrier for the fast ice that protects this fast ice cover, and also protects it from the Antarctic coastal current, also from the wind stress, and give to the sea ice stability. So their persistence is bigger, with almost dark colors close to these barriers of grounded icebergs. And finally, we have conducted 2 extra experiments in which we have been trying to simulate these iceberg sea ice interactions that currently is lacking in NEMO in a simple way, just to see if we can reproduce the land fast ice cover. For that, we have performed the first approach called fast ice, and consists basically in activate the iceberg fast ice parameterization that is already implemented in NEMO, and using our iceberg grounded distribution as a mask. Then the other approach, called land IECB, consists in transforming this grounded iceberg mask into land and see if the sea ice can grow and can be thicker close to the grounded icebergs. As you can see, these are the sea ice thickness distribution. And as you can see, both panels show a similar distribution of the sea ice thickness. And as expected, the thicker sea ice can be found on the eastern side of grounded icebergs, represented here in green in both panels, and thinner sea ice of -2 meters can be found where polynyas were expected. Here has been represented these polynyas in blue, and the grounded icebergs have been represented in dark gray. So just to finish, some take-home messages. So using realistic ice shelf thicknesses results in iceberg with a broader thickness distribution and kills deeper than 600 meters. Thick icebergs are mostly found over the Antarctic continental shelf, while smaller icebergs show broader dispersion. Thicker icebergs interact with 31% of the bathymetric features shallower than 400 meters depth, especially over the Antarctic continental shelf. Iceberg melting increases over the Antarctic continental shelf when icebergs interact with the bathymetry. Pine Island and Thwaites and Ross West are the AMBI basins that are contributing most to this Antarctic continental shelf. The freshwater enhances, as I have said, the ocean acidification, limits the deep convection, and at the end, favors the intrusion of relatively warm circumpolar deep water. Grounded icebergs can favor areas of thick sea ice when fast ice parameterization is included. And last but not least, further work is needed to fully model complex sea ice iceberg and bathymetry iceberg interactions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. So, okay, I see that there are questions coming in the chat. I suggest that Anna, you can reply, and if needed, we can discuss it afterwards. And now we are going to move to Yavor, who is actually going to tell us more about the iceberg bathymetry interaction.
Thank you so much, Nico. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, it's not in presenter. It's not in full screen. Yeah, now it is.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Yavor Kostov, based at the British Antarctic Survey, where I work on Work Package 2 of Ocean Ice under Paul Holland. And today I'll tell you more about our new model dynamics of icebergs in free flotation, as well as grounded icebergs, with a particular application to modeling icebergs in the Amundsen Sea. This interest in the interaction between icebergs and ocean topography apparently is not something new. I was surprised to find out that all the way back in 1855, Charles Darwin published a short article titled "On the Power of Icebergs to Make Rectilinear, Uniformly Directed Grooves Across a Submarine Undulatory Surface." And at that time, Charles Darwin didn't have access to a lot of observations, so he had to rely mostly on his imagination. And at present, we're still limited because these are remote and hostile regions, but at the same time, we have a lot of data collected from our colleagues from other ocean ice initiatives, as well as our colleagues from BAS. One area of focus has been the Amundsen Sea because it's right next to all these important glaciers. And so we have a lot of data, sediment samples from the bottom of the Amundsen Sea, showing what kind of sediment icebergs plow into when they ground, as well as sonar observations of iceberg scours, their width, depth, and extent. And so we're in a much better position than Charles Darwin these days to approach this problem. Our colleague at BAS, Kelly Hogan, has prepared this beautiful figure showing sonar-derived images of iceberg scours on top of the shallow bare ridge in the Amundsen Sea. And she shows here very clearly that these scours are mostly zonally oriented, although some of them show complex forms, these scour crisscrosses. And thanks to this wonderful data that Kelly Hogan has given us, we know that typically in the Amundsen Sea on Bear Ridge, iceberg scours are about 8 meters deep on average, and they're around 100 or 90 meters rather wide as an average width. Another colleague from BAS, Andrew Fleming, has compiled this sequence of satellite images focusing on Bear Ridge in the Amundsen Sea, this shallow bit, where you can see that a lot of icebergs of various sizes, some huge tabular ones as well as medium and smaller ones, ground and remain in these positions for a long time. And you may notice that in some of these satellite images, it's quite clear that besides this grounding of icebergs, we can discern a different phenomenon as well. The grounded icebergs lined up along the shallow Bear Ridge block the westward flow of sea ice, this grayish blur here, and they create this dipole in sea ice concentration with much lower sea ice concentration in the western Amundsen Sea compared to the eastern side. And this has important implications for water mass transformation in the Amundsen Sea. In this sense, icebergs that are grounded there help create this Amundsen Sea coastal polynya. But such interactions between the ocean icebergs and sea ice are ubiquitous around Antarctica, and they have an important impact on the water masses in the shelf seas. So how are these iceberg-ocean topography interactions represented in models. We focus on NEMO, which is an ocean model at the heart of a lot of national contributions to CIMIP, including a lot of UK contributions to CIMIP. In NEMO, there are icebergs that are represented in a very idealized sense as floating mass particles, where each particle is associated with width, length, and thickness. But these icebergs do not interact with each other. Their keels are aware of bottom topography. So in the pre-existing NEMO algorithms, the icebergs stop moving as soon as their keels reach a topographic obstacle. And there were two options to choose from in the pre-existing NEMO algorithms: to just remove the velocity of the icebergs that's into the direction of the topography, or to reset the total iceberg velocity vector to 0 as soon as it reaches a topographic obstacle. But both under options A and B, strong wind bursts or currents were able to reset the icebergs in motion quite quickly so that icebergs would bounce off or drift away from such obstacles. What happens in reality is that when icebergs reach a topographic obstacle, their keels plow into the bottom sediment that's piled up onto the topography. And as they scoop up sediment, they build up these sediment wedges in front of the keels. And these sediment wedges span the depth of the scour that the iceberg forms, but there's also some sediment that's piled up on top of that. So they can extend slightly above the depth of the scours. And these piled up sediments, these wedges that form, they're not consolidated yet, and their weight pushes back against the keel of the iceberg, similarly to the weight of the water in front of a wall in a dam. And this weight is proportional to the density of the sediment and also to the dimensions of the scour. In addition, within this sediment wedge in front of the keel, we form failure planes. And as they try to slide along each other, there's shear resistance that prevents this wedge from sliding forward. In addition, this whole wedge, as it's pushed forward by the iceberg keel, experiences shear resistance along its sides. And each of these different terms has a different proportionality on either the width of the scours or the depth of the scours, the density of the sediment, or its shear resistance. And we are lucky because we now have observational values that are typical of the sediments and the scours in the region. So our colleague James Smith from BAS has given us values characterizing sediment samples from the Amundsen Sea. And we know the submerged unit weight, which is like the density of the sediment, and the shear strength of the sediment in the region. And Kelly Hogan, again from BAS, has provided sonar data on the scour widths and depths. So we've been able to feed these physically motivated formulas with parameters based on actual observations and code that in the model. So the red crosses here tell us where we have sediment samples, and the magenta boxes show the areas where Kelly has actually observed scours on Bear Ridge. And we have to take into consideration some other factors as well. So keels can plow through this layer of deformable sediment on top of topography, and eventually they reach the solid basement underneath. So we know from observations that this layer of deformable sediment is only on the order of 10 meters thick in the Amundsen Sea. So icebergs with enough initial velocity and acceleration can plow all the way down, and they can actually continue to be displaced upward along the slope out of free flotation. In this case, they start to feel the effect of gravity, because there's a disequilibrium between gravity and buoyancy once they're out of free flotation. It's like floating near the floating on the in the sea on the beach, or standing up in the water in the beach. So that's the difference between free flotation and being out of free flotation. And once they feel gravity, they also feel solid body friction that's proportional to the normal force into the topography. And we have to code in the model different coefficients for friction when the iceberg is moving or when it's static. And in addition, these forces act on different timescales, which necessitates the introduction of temporal substepping for icebergs in the model. And we also have to treat the dissipative forces, such as friction and sediment resistance, differently from the non-dissipative forces. And once we build this model machinery, we're able to simulate iceberg scours along Bear Ridge using NEMO. So we can emulate realistic iceberg scours where we see that they're mostly oriented in the zona direction, just like in observations, and then occasionally they crisscross. And when we look at the depth of these scours, we see that it doesn't evolve monotonically. So we have these undulations because the icebergs melt and they shallow a bit, but at the same time, there are bursts of strong wind that push them forward. And what you can't see in observations, but you can see in the model, is a temporal evolution of these scours, shown on the right-hand side. And that reveals that these scours are formed very intermittently over short episodes. So we have long episodes when the icebergs are static, and then short bursts when the icebergs are grounded, but in a kinetic regime. They're embedded in the sediment, but moving and plowing scours. And these short intermittent episodes, there in between them, we have long episodes when the icebergs just don't move. And these scours are on a very small scale. If we zoom out from a distance, just like in the satellite images, it would almost appear as if the icebergs don't move at all. So that's one of the useful achievements of implementing this iceberg grounding scheme in NEMO, because with the previous iceberg grounding scheme, which was very simplified, whenever we released icebergs here in the regions marked with X's near Bear Ridge, they would bounce off the topographic obstacles and find different routes around these barriers, and eventually they would ground closer either to the continental edge or to the sea ice, to the ice shelf edge. While with the new, more realistic, observationally and physically motivated grounding scheme, when we release icebergs near the shallow end of Bear Ridge, they hit these topographic obstacles and they plow into the sediment. They form these scours, but if we zoom out, it's as if these icebergs almost don't move a lot, and they remain grounded, embedded in the sediment over the course of years, which is what we see in the satellite images as well. So this is our goal. We wanted to be able to reproduce the grounding of icebergs along Bear Ridge and similar shallow topographic features around Antarctica. But at the same time, we also wanted to explore the various forces acting on icebergs, both in their free flotation state and in their grounded state. And those include the atmospheric stress, so the wind stress, also the ocean drag that icebergs experience due to the relative motion of icebergs relative to the ambient currents. And we had to improve that in the model because previously the model representation did not take into account the nonlinearity of turbulent ocean drag. So the ocean drag depends on this relative motion of the icebergs with respect to the ambient currents. But previously, the model first averaged over a vertical profile of the relative speed, and then used that to come up with a drag coefficient. While we think it's more realistic to represent this turbulent drag as a nonlinear profile that is then vertically averaged over the keel depth of the iceberg. Another important force acting both on kinetically grounded icebergs, icebergs that move while they're embedded in sediment, and icebergs in free flotation, is the Coriolis force, which deflects their motion to the left in the southern hemisphere, and also the pressure gradients within the ocean water column. They also push icebergs that are grounded, but also icebergs that are in free flotation. We once again improved that in the NEMO iceberg algorithms because previously the pressure gradient force acting on icebergs was only represented with this blue term. So it was only approximated as a function of the sea surface height h. And we added a dependence of the pressure gradients on the density anomalies as well, where here we've considered the density anomalies relative to a Boussinesq reference density. And that has also been another improvement of the NEMO iceberg dynamics that we incorporated in the model. And to a smaller extent, icebergs in the region also feel the impact of sea ice drag. So the sea ice pack can also exert a drag on the icebergs. But what is the dominance of each of these forces relative to each other? To explore that, we remapped the action of these forces into a coordinate system that tracks each iceberg as it moves forward. So here, F denotes a direction forward along the direction of the iceberg motion. B stands for backward, acting against the direction of motion of icebergs. L means to the left of the direction of motion, and R to the right. And this is averaged over 500 simulated icebergs and over the course of 1 year. So you can see that for these large icebergs, large and thick tabular icebergs, we mostly have a balance between atmospheric drag acting almost to the right of the direction of motion, the Coriolis force to the left, and a small ocean drag. But if we consider thinner and smaller icebergs, we have a different balance of forces. So the atmospheric drag starts to project in a direction more aligned with the forward direction of motion. The Coriolis force, of course, always remains pointing to the left. But to balance the atmospheric drag, we now see a larger ocean turbulent drag acting on these smaller icebergs. So we see that winds project more strongly along the direction of motion of smaller icebergs. And also we have a stronger ocean turbulent drag on these smaller icebergs, which may imply that potentially they would experience faster basal melting if we think that the basal melting depends on the rate of the ocean turbulent drag. There have been previous studies that have suggested that these differences between the motion of larger and smaller icebergs would be valid if the ocean were in purely geostrophic balance, but we think that these relationships are more universal and hold under realistic ocean conditions. For example, in the conditions that we've simulated in the Amundsen Sea. So just to summarize, we have implemented a new realistic, physically and observationally motivated iceberg grounding scheme in NEMO. And this can be extended in future studies that can explore the interactions between the ocean, icebergs, and sea ice. In addition, we've done analysis of the forest budgets for grounded and freely floating icebergs and icebergs of different sizes and thicknesses. And we've highlighted the importance of iceberg size for the forest balance. In particular, it seems that the rate of ocean turbulent drag is larger on the smaller icebergs, which may have implications for their rate of melting. And in that sense, our study actually raises new questions for future research because it makes us question the role of fragmentation of large icebergs into smaller ones. Do grounded icebergs fragment more easily? And then subsequently, do the smaller fragments of icebergs that have broken up experience a different turbulent drag and a different rate of basal melting compared to their larger parent icebergs that they've fragmented from? And this work has just been submitted to the Cryosphere and is now under review. Thank you for your attention and for the opportunity to present it to you.
Thank you, Yavor. We are perfectly on time. Don't hesitate to put questions in the chat. And we have now the last speaker, Anna Wåhlin.
Thank you very much. Does it look okay? This?
Yes.
And I want a pointer. No. Do you see the pointer?
Yes.
Good. So I would like to show you a little bit of very, very preliminary results, or actually, I don't think there are much of results, but things that make our scratch our heads at the moment. And it's to do with melting inside an ice shelf fracture, and it was very much inspired by the multi-beam imagery that we obtained from dots on ice shelves. And there are many, many co-workers in, as always, in these projects. And I think you have heard enough of this already this afternoon, why it's the different methods for investigating the ice shelf cavities and why it's important. So I just skip ahead to, if you haven't seen me show this before, this is our AUV that we used to have at the University of Gothenburg with many, many sensors, 38 different sensors. And during the cruise, the ocean ice cruise, we lost it in 2024. So that was sad, but we are lucky enough to be able to replace it, actually. So we are working with that right now. But one of the most exciting things I thought that you can get from it is the upward-looking multi-beam. And you saw Stina share some equally exciting results, I think, from the long-range ADCP. But this work is focused on the multi-beam, which has a higher resolution. If you go near the ice, you can get quite small footprint and very high resolution. And since you get high resolution, you have only got 400 data points or so. So if you want high resolution, you don't cover a lot of area. So in that case, you have to go like lawnmower patterns like this in order to get maps of the ice. So this is what we did in 22. And from this data, which was published last year, we learned a bit about dots on ice shelf. We already knew that there is an inflow of warm circumpolar deep water at depth, and we knew that there is an outflow in the west. The new things we learned was that this outflow, first of all, we could observe it inside the cavity. So it's a part of a current system going on inside the cavity. And we also saw the patterns that this strong outflow make on the ice. And in particular, there were some really interesting teardrop-shaped features. And then the other new thing, sort of, that we learned is that in the east, you have an inflow of warmer surface, near surface water that flows in near the ice, and they give rise to some very strange swirly patterns. And these are just examples of what the data looked like that we observed. So these are the teardrop features, and these are the swirly features. You can call these plateaus or terraces, but in a sense, it's like anti-terraces. It's a flat areas where ice has been removed from other flat areas. And here is another zoom in of a part of that. And when we lost it, we were going back to this region. So we were lucky enough to get one repeat 2 years apart. And the most striking thing was that it was very similar. Not much has happened. These anti-terraces, they are very stable, it seems. If you look closer, you see that they do melt a bit. We have some changes. If you take 22 minus 24, you get an estimate of the basal melt, or the ice that has been removed from the base. And what we can see for sure is that it's a quite local process in this part of the ice shelf. There's large areas where not much happens, and then some parts where a lot happens. So the red here is 20 meters over those 2 years, so 10 meters per year, and the pink is less than a meter. So that's that. But we have, because we don't have a vehicle anymore, we have time now to work with the data. And the thing that has been interesting us, one of the things is what happens inside the fractures. So we did observe several of these fractures. So the gray part is a satellite image, and the colored parts, that's what it looks like from below. So we have got quite good observations of the base of these fractures. And this is near the center of the ice shelf. And then we also saw 2 or 3 near the east, where you can see them extending and then disappearing. So this is like where these fractures are sort of born. And if you look at, because you can see them on satellite images, you have a possibility to date them to get their age. And we could see that these big fractures that are quite wide, and now after our surveys, we also learned that they are a bit smoothed out at the base. They are about 30 to 40 years old, at least. And then we had some fractures that are narrower and also much more perpendicular. They are not smoothed out. They are 5 years old or so. So over the years, these fractures become wider, but they also are worn out at the base. And if you look at a transect like this, if you take a cross section and plot the ice, you see this blue line here. So this is what an old fracture looked like in the profile, quite similar to this one there. And this is a young fracture there. The red dots are data points. So this one, probably we see it from the surface, so it extends through the surface, but there are no data points because the sound gets lost in the fracture. The red dot appears when there's an echo coming back, and here they just keep moving inside the fracture. And here's another old one. And this is a zoom in on one of the old fractures. So in addition to this wearing off of the base, there is this banana-shaped features protruding from the fractures. We don't see them anywhere else, but we really don't know what caused them. And if you take many of these lines like this and plot all the profiles, you can look at them here, and then it's quite evident that they are quite similar to each other. They don't change much as you move along the fracture. And the old ones, they're not exponential like you would have thought, like many things do naturally in nature, but they are quite linear. They have a linear slope, and then they end up at the base of the ice. And if you plot them on top of each other, it looks like this. So here they are, sort of yellow is one, and then going on and on and on. And this is one of the younger ones, and this one is 8 to 10 years, and the average slope here is 45 degrees. And this is one of the older ones, about 30 years, and the average slope there is 22 degrees. And here is another old one where it's 25-degree slope. And here you can see most of them, the base in between the fractures end up at the same level here or at this level here. And you could, if you look here at this again, you can see the pattern there. So this is the pattern you are seeing. So this got us thinking, because it's so similar as you move along the fracture. We also know that there's quite a bit of variability and fronts underneath the ice. So this is kind of curious that it looks so similar, and also the fact that these slopes are quite, it seems to end up at 20 to 25 degrees. It doesn't go beyond that. So this tells us that maybe there's a chance to actually understand what happens inside these fractures. So we got inspired by density currents. This is from Matthew Wells' paper in 2010, where you have a dense plume moving down a slope, and this dense plume will entrain water and so on, and somewhere it interleaves at its level of neutral density and fills up the basin surrounding it, and then you have a dense water moving up. So this is a demonstration of an interaction between a plume and its interior, and we thought maybe something like that can be done for these fractures as well. So if you think that you have somewhere here, you initiate some melt, that creates a plume moving up, and when the plume moves, it will increase its speed, and you will have entrainment and maybe more melt. And then somewhere it will get to its level of neutral density, and then it will start to fill the area, the volume of the fracture with colder water, and that thing will go on. And we thought maybe we end up with some linear stratification or temperature profiles, if we are lucky. So we did prepare for this experiments. We went to Australia. Also, that was winter in Sweden, so it was very nice to be in Australia. Now, nice and lovely summer, and parrots flying around everywhere. It was amazing. And then we thought a little bit how to do this. So to do it on the rotating table, if you have just normal straight fractures, you will have boundaries that steer the flow, like edges and walls. So in order to look really at what goes on at the vertical wall, we want cylinder symmetric system, and then you will not have a boundary at the other end, and then we can just look at what goes up near the wall. And then we tried with some different shapes of ice, including at the end, including some channels. And the observations we did was of temperature in the water here, and the ice shape, and the flow velocity, and how much the walls of the ice melted, and so on. And if you're not familiar, rotating table is used to simulate the Coriolis frequency. So this is it here, and I think there is a, if I can get this movie to show. Oh, I can't, because, sorry. Yeah, there it goes. So this is what it looks like when you run an experiment. So this is the Keal Stewart there. The laser is to do some PIV data to get velocity. And you have to actually, when you want to do stuff with this rotating table, you have to walk around circles or run. So that we had quite some fun here. Yeah, it was good times. You have to move the ice. The ice is very heavy. A size ice like this weighs about 20 kilos. So it was heavy lifting. Muddy Rose also came to visit and helped us with the experiment. So here they are lifting out one of the blocks of ice. And this is what it looks like when it spins. And here is a comparison, what the ice looks like before, at the start of the experiment, and this is what it looked like after the experiment. So you can see these structures that have formed in the ice. And in order to document these structures, besides just a photograph, we used something called photogrammetry that is more and more used for many different things, and we used it for ice, and it is a bit of a challenge because ice is transparent, and so we had to put a little bit of milk in the ice to make it white, and also to get good photogrammetry you need pictures, so we fixed that by painting the ice like this. And then if you take 300 photographs from different angles of a thing like this, you can get a model of it. And this is our designated photographer, who is also my husband, and he joined the project as a volunteer. So he spent many hours in this photo studio, painting and photographing. And this is the result from that photogrammetry. So this is one experiment. It looked like this before, a normal cylinder. And from the photogrammetry, you can also get out the data quality so red is bad quality and blue is good. So before the experiment, we had a cylinder, and after you can see this thing here with some features. And then if you use a software that Stina knows about, it's called Cloud Compare. You can take a surface like this and sort of unroll it like a toilet roll, and then you can look more easily at these features. So now we are here with the features, and we think they look a little bit similar to what was observed with ice fin at sloping ice surfaces near the grounding zone of Thwaites. But we don't know more than that they look similar. This is, as I said, very preliminary. And another thing that is noticed is these even smaller features like channels. They are formed by bubbles that rise up from the ice. This ice, like glacial ice, contains a lot of bubbles, and when they melt out, they form, follow one trace, and if there is a small trace, for some reason, the next bubble tends to go there as well. So we don't think these are really relevant for the big scale things going on. But the other thing we learned was that the fractures are super important, because we tried different ways of freezing ice, and this was one of the first ways. We just froze ice in buckets, and then you get fractures when the ice expands. And we saw that the first really significant difference between all these experiments were there fractures, and if there were, that is where the melt went. It wasn't breaking more. We didn't see any ice lumps flying around, but the melt happened there for some reason. And as the melt goes on, the fresh meltwater moves up in the water column and starts to, first it forms a lens, and this is, we had an infrared camera looking at it, so you can get velocities from that as well, and you can see that it moves like this, like it should, for a freshwater lens like that. And this freshwater lens is, maybe you can think of that as the coastal current moving around Antarctica. And where we have that coastal current, there is much less melt. The boundary between the meltwater layer and the warm layer, that is the big difference in melt. So we have high melt below that boundary, and the boundary moves down slowly, and then much less melt up here. And the other thing is that most of the melt is sideways down here. In an experiment like this, one option could be that it melted from below, but it doesn't. Most of the melt, or at least as much, is sideways. And that means that if you're interested in basal melt and you also have these structures with very high slopes, you need to think about how you define basal melt, because normally it's defined vertical, but what you're after is the melt of the base, which is not horizontal, and then you have to turn your angle so that it's orthogonal to the ice base. Otherwise, it looks like you have stripes of very high melt, where it's actually horizontal melt that's equal. And then we did the final experiment that we had time to do, was rotating ice. So you can, in that lab, you can spin the ice, and then it looked like this. So this was quite cold water, but these patterns were formed. So this is the analog of what it looks like if you have water moving inside the fracture. And these scallops, they are quite a bit sharper, and they developed much faster. And they are always orthogonal to the flow direction. And maybe they can be thought about as a little bit like ice ripples. They maybe we haven't thought more, but an idea is that they are formed in a way similar to sand ripples are formed, and also surface waves in the ocean, that a low pressure and high pressure is sort of increased once you start a small disturbance. And we also tried to seed the ice, and that didn't make a huge difference. A bit of a pattern can be seen if you seed it with a hole before. So that's where we are. I thought if I volunteer this subject, I will have to do lots of research before the seminar, but this is as far as I came. So to summarize, what we have seen so far is that first thing that happens is that you have cold meltwater that fills up the water volume where the ice is, and the melting is reduced above that level. But it's not linear in the lab experiments. It's more like a stepwise change. We also see scallops. They form when you have convection in the water, and then another type of scallops form when the water is moving. It could be that they are related. It could be that at the same time that we have convection, we also have a motion in the water that we were not quite aware of or could not detect so well. And then also it's clear that melting from the sides are equally large as from below, or larger. And then you need to think about that when you estimate basal melt. But the short version is, I think, that we do not quite understand this yet. So any comments or suggestions for this, or how to move on, will be very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, so I didn't see any more questions in the chat. Or Q and answer. No. Okay. Are there any questions by attendees? I can unmute you if you want to ask a question directly, or among the panelists.
There's still this one question in the chat. I don't know if it was already answered.
Anna?
No, I don't think so. But I can answer it right now. Okay, so well, let me read again the question. Do you know which impact would this have in the formation of Antarctic bottom water? So I cannot answer quantitatively, but definitely if the icebergs are grounding in over the Antarctic continental shelf, this at the end is promoting the formation of coastal polynyas. And in these coastal polynyas, the new sea ice is formed. So when this sea ice is formed with there's this process called brine rejection. The cold water is then densified. So this leads to dense water mass formation. And at the end, without these coastal polynyas, we will have less Antarctic bottom formation. So I know that probably Nico can say more about it, but at least in the future it's expected that ice shelves will be thinner. So probably thinner icebergs will be released from them. And at the same time, this will provoke that icebergs will not be able to ground. And then less coastal polynyas will be, or at least for less time, these coastal polynyas will be formed, leading less production of Antarctic bottom water mass formation. So yes, really impacts in this Antarctic bottom water mass formation. And definitely if they cannot ground, we will find less volume of this water mass.
Thank you, Anna. Other questions?
I also have a question.
Yeah.
But it's a more general question. What would you say? What is the biggest challenge or the knowledge gap in the work package 2? Anything that needs to be addressed in the future work of work package 2?
Who wants to give elements? Yavor, about the icebergs?
Yes, well, one process that's definitely missing from NEMO at the moment is the ability to form resolvable iceberg fragments. So something that I didn't have to elaborate on in my presentation was that, as of course Nico knows and the developers of NEMO know, icebergs are allowed to shed small bits that melt in a very parameterized fashion, but we never allow icebergs to break into smaller segments. We form icebergs of particular sizes following better and better algorithms like the one Anna has developed, but these are applied at the point of calving and not later on. And we know that in the real world, icebergs can fragment. And we see that this affects their dynamics, how they drift relative to the wind direction or relative to the ocean currents. This affects the rate of turbulent drag they experience and maybe even the rate of basal melting. So this could be one potential direction of improving the models.
And I would say that generally it's like ice fracturing is also an unknown for the ice shelves. Still very difficult in ice sheet models to do iceberg calving. And it's true that also it has to see with probably with interaction with bathymetry. We see very well that with these huge tabular icebergs, when they drift along the iceberg alley, usually they break a lot when they get grounded on next to an island. And so that's probably important, but it's true that we don't know how to do it yet.
Yes, and I think there's room for a lot of input by the observational teams as well. So both remote sensing and in situ observations that can help us understand what's going on in the real world when these icebergs form fragments.
And I think that there was a lot of unknown also in Anna's presentation, Anna Wåhlin. It was mostly about unknowns.
Thank you.
I was wondering, Anna, the slope of 22, 25 degrees that you see in the fractures, is it the same slope that you see between the inverse terraces? Is it similar or not at all?
I think it is similar, actually. I
And
never thought
do we
about
know the
that.
process leading to this slope and terraces?
Yeah, maybe. That's a really good point. I think actually it is quite similar between, I think some of them are up to 45, but I think most are around 25. Good point. Now we understand even less.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't tell us what happens. Yeah.
I have one more. I
yeah.
might have one more question. And sorry if it was by any chance answered already. I'm curious about the collaboration of Work Package 2 with other partners, either within the Ocean Ice project with other work packages or other international partners.
I can maybe start on the icebergs and that I will let maybe Anna Wåhlin complete about the rest. So we collaborate a lot with external partners, in particular in Paris and in Belgium, who are working on fast ice, and it's very complementary. We have worked with Anna and Yavor on the grounding and drift of icebergs, but then there is also the part of simulating fast ice, how they interact with icebergs and so on, which is also complicated. So we have started a collaboration thanks to Ocean Ice with them. And Yavor, maybe you want to say more about your work in Work Package 6?
Yes, the work in Work Package 6 that I'm involved in also has to do with icebergs, but in a fully coupled configuration of NEMO with the bicycle's ice sheet and also with relatively realistic atmospheric conditions as well. And in that configuration of the model coupled to bicycles, we're exploring potential future scenarios for the evolution of greenhouse gas forcing and how the Southern Ocean and Antarctica respond. And we're in particular interested in the potential for reaching and crossing tipping points. So that's a really hot topic at the moment. And various research centers under various projects and initiatives are looking at the same issue, the risk of reaching a tipping point in the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. So I think if we were to list all the collaborations that we're either directly involved in or indirectly through, say, Paul Holland or Robin Smith, it's a really large network of collaborations when it comes to exploring the potential for tipping points from various angles. That seems to be a major research priority at the moment.
Thanks. What about the others?
Maybe I can fill in a bit. We also have a very large network and collaborate, for example, going to Australia for the lab experiments. But I think the most important collaboration we have is the field work that has been Korea. Polar Copri has been very, so we have worked a lot with the Korean scientists. It was initiated during the field work and that continues now. And yeah, depending on what expertise is needed, we tend to reach out, I think, in this science.
Other things to mention?
We have this collaboration with Inha University also, where Xiaohan was a visiting student for 2 years, which has worked really nicely. And she's defending her thesis now soon, so that was very good.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Other questions? Anybody wants to be unmuted in the attendees? If not, maybe we can stop there. So thank you to all of you for your nice presentations, and thank you for the people who have followed these presentations. Have a good evening, have a good day.
Yeah, I would also like to thank you all. Thank you, Nico, for moderating this session, and thanks to all these our incredible speakers and panelists today. Thank you for your time, your research, and your willingness to share your research with the polar research community. And we are happy to have such brilliant minds contributing to the Ocean Ice project, pushing the boundaries of polar science. So I would also like to thank the audience that they stayed here until the end. It was a bit longer webinar, and I hope to see you all soon. There are no further webinars planned, or their dates are not announced yet, but I guess the next one should happen in September. So just keep an eye on the Ocean Ice website and social media. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva.
Bye.
Bye-bye.